What's that?
Oh, Jesus, something's blown, something. Pull in here, pull in here. I can't believe this.
Nothing.
Gasket's gone.
How much? 500.
£500 or pence? Let me have a look at it.
Whoa, 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 whoa! I ain't finished yet.
Oh, you finished? Give us the keys.
30?
30 quid?
Sod off. It's worth 300, that.
5 years ago, maybe. Not now.
No, you're all right. We'll leave it.
We'll leave
you're
it.
all right.
300.
Hello and welcome back to Everard Junction. Today we're going to be working on the scrapyard, but before we get stuck into that and creating the scene that you see before you, I'll just quickly go through a couple of bits and pieces that I've been working on over the past couple of weeks. If you're curious about working cars on the layout, I have made a video that covers this subject, and although it's not a particularly easy system to install, if you can get it working properly, it is very effective. I'll leave a link for the video in the video description, and there's also a link on screen now. I've been working a lot on the rolling stock over the last couple of weeks. Something I've done to this particular train is add 5 more HEA hoppers, and they required repainting and weathering and having coal added to them. And I'll show you that in a bit more detail. And the train coming the other way, this is my Ministry of Defence train. It's carrying lots of equipment for the army in those vans, and you can see I've done a lot of repainting and work to those as well, and I've also added a couple more wagons to the rake. There's one of the wagons in question. These were originally in British Rail bauxite, which is a sort of dark brown colour. I repainted them into rail freight red, and you can see I've also added various bits of rust, touch-up repairs and primer. So I've done that to 5 wagons in the rake, as they were all in this colour, and they were just 5 wagons I had spare. Now I have a slightly larger layout than the old layout. I have enough room to add 20 wagons to this train, so it's now quite a decent length. Now I've added the extra 5 wagons that I had sitting downstairs in my spares box. You can see there's another pair of them. I made these ones look a little bit more tired than the ones I've repainted previously, just to add some variation to the rake, and I also faded the red quite considerably. And although it's difficult to see on camera, the red is noticeably more orange on those 5 examples, and it just picks out the faded and tired condition that these trains were often seen in. The wagons in this train have also received a great deal of work. I removed the weathering that I did previously. Some of these I weathered a few years ago. Wasn't very happy with it, so I removed all of that and redid the weathering to a better, more realistic standard, and made an effort to clean up some of the wagons that were in more recent liveries, such as that one. So that one's fairly clean and tidy, as it's a more modern livery. These particular wagons here were completely repainted into rail freight livery. I have 5 of these, and these were in the later rail freight distribution livery with the yellow ends, and I've repainted those into the earlier version of the livery, changed all of the transfers over, painted the ends red, and completely re-weathered them, leaving some very clean and shiny and others much dirtier. These wagons here are a new arrival to the layout. These were recently released by Bachmann, although they've been making them for years. They've done another batch, so I got a couple of those, 3 of those in fact, and then you can see some of the other repainted and re-weathered items in the train. I've also worked quite hard adding some detail to the roof. Very hard to see it on camera, but I've added some roof ribs to these wagons, as they were often seen in real life, just starting to show the ribbing showing through the roof. So I've added that, although it's very subtle to see, it is there. And I've also added the usual sort of rain washed effect and a bit of fading to make the roof felt look quite old. There's another example there. Hopefully you can see the roof ribs. You can also see some of the fading and damage that I've added, just to make them look a little bit more real. As you can imagine, it took quite a while to repaint most of the vehicles in this train and get everything weathered and sorted out, but I'm much happier with how it looks. So I'm just going to get some different couplers and try and bring those a little bit closer together, as that's the only thing that really lets this train down now. Whilst doing all of that, I have been working on the scrapyard quite a lot, but obviously progress has not been perhaps as fast as I would have liked because I've got so many projects on the go at one time. But I do now have enough footage together to present this video to you, and this scrapyard is certainly not finished. Plenty more to add, so there'll be a separate video on this in future. So I've picked up a couple of bits and bobs from places like Goodwood Scenics. We've got some sort of scrap looking stuff in there, and I've also got some other bits and pieces like these scrap tubes or pipes, things like that. So I'm going to experiment with a little bit of that. I don't want this to be just cars. I sort of have a bit of other stuff in there as well. I'm going to keep an area separated, perhaps back here, and that's going to be reserved for appliances. I have a nice big pile of white goods, which certainly look quite interesting in model form. I've seen that at an exhibition on another layout, and it looked fantastic. So I'd like to try and create a little bit of that. And I've also got some of these partially crushed, completely written off cars, and these were suggested to me in one of my previous videos, and I'm sorry to whoever it was because I've completely forgotten your name, but thanks very much for suggesting those. These will complement these cars very nicely. Now, I will have to use a little bit of modeller's license with these cars, as some of them are actually from the future with regards to when my layout is set. So here we have what I believe to be a W126 Mercedes. This looks like an Audi 80, probably a late 90s one, just before they became the Audi A4. And this is an Opel Manta, as far as I can tell, or at least it looks a little bit like an Opel Manta. And that is actually correct for the time period. There's also an E28 BMW, I believe, but that broke when I was painting it to the point where it was unusable. But just be aware, they're mostly German cars from the 1990s, with the exception of the Opel Manta. But given they're all crushed and destroyed, it doesn't really matter. Most people will look at that and go, oh, that's just a written-off car. These cars are obviously much more recognisable, so I've made sure they're all fitting for the time period that the layout is set. Okay, so there's the yard. You can see how smooth and uniform it is. That's certainly not like a real scrapyard. If you're lucky, there might be a bit of concrete as you walk in, but certainly once you get into the yard, it turns to mostly car parts and mud. So we'll experiment with some scatters and a few bits of scrap and stuff like that, and try and lay out a sort of rough idea of what we want the layout of the scrapyard to be, and then we can start placing some of the vehicles, and if we're happy, then we can go ahead and glue that into position. Okay, so I've just gone over the top of that with some of the Hatton's oil spill kit, which is basically just tiling grout, but it's very, very fine, and it just helps blend the flat concrete that I've done previously into the sort of coarser scatters that we put down on top of that. The colour is not finalised yet, can always go over it with the airbrush, but certainly looks like a much more unpleasant random surface. So I'm going to start putting down some of the cars. Most of these, if not all of these, are made by Oxford Diecast, and I've painted and fiddled and messed about with them to try and create a bit of a story with each vehicle. So I'm going to start creating the main stack at the back of the scrapyard behind this fence, and what I'm going to do is put the older vehicles in first, because usually you would find those towards the back of the scrapyard, as they would have been brought in when the scrapyard was more empty, and then more recent, more modern cars are either going to be on top or more towards the front of the scrapyard as the place begins to fill up. So you can see we've got a Triumph 2000 and a Mark 1 Capri, and then we can complement that with something like a Rover P6. and these went out of production in about 1976. So you get the idea, the older cars at the back of the scrapyard, Mark 1 Capri going out of production much earlier. So try and put the older cars at the back, and then sort of as you move towards the entrance, the vehicles need to become slightly newer. Can happily stack a car on top of another car without significant damage to the pillars for the roof. You'd be surprised how strong a car actually is. It's not uncommon to see cars, certainly back in the 80s, stacked 3-4 high in some cases, and usually was the one at the very top that you wanted the dashboard out of. But, so it's quite alright to put, say, a Fiesta on top of that Morris Marina just like that, and that is entirely in keeping with the real thing. Okay, that'll do it for cars. Don't want too many more cars, as we do want to fill the scrapyard with some other bits and pieces as well. Or perhaps we'll just add one more, because you can't have a scrapyard without a Ford Cortina in it. Perfect. Okay, so I'm quite pleased with the position of those. I won't actually glue any of them properly down, just in case I do want to move things around in future, but that will certainly do in terms of positioning the scatter in that area. I'm quite pleased with how it's looking. The crushed vehicles, of which there are 4, do add just a little something. You can't tell what they are, not easily anyway, but it gives you that that extra level of condition in the scrapyard. Not every single car is going to be structurally still there. So we've got a complete car like that Austin Princess, but underneath we've got something that's barely recognisable, clearly been in a nasty accident or has been partially crushed at the yard. And then we've got stuff like this Marina here that's been in a front end smash, and that Escort there that's been rear-ended. And then we've got more complete cars, Capri that slid off a roundabout into a lamppost. And then underneath those two, you can just about see the crushed cars there, the Audi being just underneath the Princess. I wanted to obscure the crushed vehicles a little bit, as they are a little bit too new for the era the layout is set. But that's quite a scene in the making there. So before we start adding the details to the scrapyard, I'll just quickly show you the process I follow for weathering and detailing some of the vehicles. So here we have the next candidate. This is a Mark 1 Ford Transit, and even by the time period of the layout, 1989, this vehicle would have been well over 10 years old. So it is extremely likely that it would have been rotten and lying in a scrapyard. Certainly, if it was on the road, it would have been hanging by a thread. I've stripped this model back to bare metal and just painted it white. I did this quite some time ago, and you can see it's not the best paint job in the world, but it will certainly do the job for a scrapped vehicle with no wheels just sitting in the yard. So I've glued the glazing in the interior to this van so that I can take the chassis out, remove the wheels without it falling to bits. And then I've just put a cocktail stick on the bottom of the van with a bit of super glue, which I'll snap off later, and this is just so we can hold it whilst we do all the painting. So I'll start off applying a black wash to the door shuts, and we'll do the same for any vents and shut lines on the rest of the model, and this applies to trucks, cars, buses, vans. Works very well, just gives the model just that little bit of extra realism. And we're just going to take a cotton bud, a little bit of thinner, and just wipe off some of the excess that's got onto areas of the body where we don't want it. And then what we'll do is leave that to dry, and then we'll move on to the next stage. And this is something I generally do for all model vehicles on the layout, whether or not they're going to be new or scrapped or weathered. Now that's dried, we'll apply some black or dark grey paint to the whole side of the model and just work that into the detail. And then what we'll do is start to rub some of that off and eventually rub probably 90-95% of it off, and the effect leaves you with some ingrained dirt in some other parts of the model, such as underneath that swage line just running along the side of the van. This gives the van a slightly dirty, work-worn appearance and works well for most commercials. Now we start adding the age and the repairs, so we'll do a couple of doors, various panels in a different colour to the bodywork, and you can do that in a primer colour, or in this case here what I've done is I've done it in a red to show that someone's actually swapped the doors from another van that was in better condition, and sort of give the van a little bit of a story as it started to deteriorate. And as this van is going to be in particularly bad condition, we can add some more patches and repairs. So we're just masking up and applying some slightly different tones of white and primer, grey, black, various colours to represent primer, underseal and various, bodge repairs to keep the vehicle going for those last few months. Here we're just adding a little bit of underseal or body chutes to the bottoms of the sill. This is a common sight on a lot of old classic vehicles. Certainly during the 1960s, 70s and 80s, it's quite normal to have a vehicle drive past you and for the bottom half of it to be black or grey as the owner sort of tries to hide the condition of the vehicle by just sort of painting over all the rust. I decided to add quite a lot of patches and repairs to this van as it's in the scrapyard, so we want to make it look nice and worn out. So now we add the rust, and I do this with a small piece of sponge or packing foam from a box, and you can see they're just very lightly dabbing over the surface of the paintwork and the surface of the van. You get a sort of rusty speckled effect. Just use any dark brown paint will do. I used some Vallejo black brown. We just go over the whole van with that sponge, and that just creates that rusty blistered effect. You can see the paint has lost the battle with nature and the metal is starting to rust underneath. Then we can come along with a cotton bud and some thinners, and we can just wipe some of those bits off where it's a little bit too intense, tone things down and create some areas of paintwork that are in better condition than others. I paid particular attention to the roof, as the van's got a bit of detail up there, and the roof of a van is often in quite a poor state versus the rest of the vehicle. They don't tend to get cleaned very much. Finally, a little bit of weathering powder from the Tamiya Master Weathering set. I've got set A and set B. I quite like the colours in there, and we're just applying just a small amount of that. A little bit goes a long way, and most of the effects we've done is with paintwork, but a little bit of streaking with some weathering powder just gives that van a little bit of a rain-washed effect. So the next thing to do is to seal it with some matte varnish to stop this paint from being easily chipped off. and I will just put a little bit of liquid masking fluid over the windscreen, the rear windows and the side windows, but I'll just do a couple of blobs of masking so it looks like someone's wiped the windows with a rag to try and see inside, looking for a decent dashboard or perhaps a better gear stick or something like that. Okay, there we have it, ready to go into the scrapyard along with some of the other vehicles, such as this other Mark 1 Transit. Right, the first round of bits and bobs and detail. This is a mixture of scale model scenery, Bachmann Scenecraft and Hornby Scaledale products and items, and we're just going to put some of these around the scrapyard and try and create a little bit of detail, and then I'll probably end up coming back with more and more bits and pieces as time goes on. So now we're going to go for the second round of detailing. Lots and lots of little bits and pieces to add, and even when I say the scrapyard is finished, it's a scrapyard. You can always throw more stuff into it. So this is a load of scale model scenery stuff. They do these quite attractive bins, scrap metal bins. I actually have a few of these at my work, and they're very close to the one we have there. So I've painted those into some different colours, and then I've just used some offcuts and bits from various sprues that are left over from previous kits. So for example, these are out of a sprue that I just kept hold of as it was a nice piece of material. So they can be some boards. Certainly when I go to a scrapyard and I'm trying to get a starter motor out of something, first thing I'll do is look for a for sale sign from a house or a piece of plywood or something just to put on the ground so it's slightly more pleasant while I remove whatever part it is I'm looking for. So I thought a couple of these strewn around the vehicles would make a nice little detail. Perhaps we'll even have a couple of figures, trying to get, a front hub off for parts or whatever, trying to get a steering rack out, that type of thing. And then we've just got a few odds and ends, a few vents and grills. There's a couple of drain covers there and a random industrial ladder. It wouldn't be a scrapyard without a pile of old exhausts in a corner somewhere, so I've used a scale model scenery bus stop kit, and the plastic rod that's used for the metal post on the bus stop is extremely easy to shape using a small pair of needle nose pliers. So I've just shaped up some generic looking exhausts. I'm aware they don't have silencers fitted, but for the moment I'm happy with the appearance, and if I do come across a piece of tube with a thick outer diameter to represent an exhaust silencer, then I'll probably make some more to add that additional bit of realism. I've painted these 3 different colours. This is just sort of like a rust colour, and then we've got blue and a faded red, and that's just to create a little bit of variety, as aside from that they're all relatively similar. And I'll put some of them in a few places around the yard, and I'm going to try and see if we can do 2 or 3 down here by the office, and that can be somewhere where more common items are chucked away. So as you walk in, it could be a place, for example, you dispose of your batteries, you put all your old car batteries in one of these, and then the scrap merchant, he sends them off, he gets a few quid for those, things like that. Okay, so that's the second bit of detail put in. We'll just have a quick look around. So you can see there's all sorts of stuff: traffic cones, pallets, bicycles, bits of exhaust, planks of wood, drums, scrap metal bins, the cars themselves, tyres. I've even got, it's just over there in the background, every scrapyard had one of these, traditional phone box, usually put in some corner somewhere. Got some metal I-beams over there, and lots of other bits and pieces. Quite a lot of this will get a little bit of airbrushing and a little bit of painting once I've finished. There's so many loose items. What I'm going to do is soak the area with some isopropyl alcohol when we're happy, and that will glue the scatter materials and provide a light adhesion for all of the bits of detail, so they don't just get knocked over or blow away. But you get the idea. Lots and lots of little bits and pieces, and I could easily take the same amount of stuff again and add it, and it would look even better, and just keep on improving it. So I'm going to go away and make some more bits and pieces, and if you're wondering why this side is so clear, what I'm hoping to do is to have this side strewn with scrap appliances, washing machines, fridges, that type of thing, just to create that little bit of variety, bit of distance from the vehicles. Perhaps the main trade is vehicles, and then he got into washing machines and things like that because they were easier to dispose of or whatever. But I'm quite liking that. It's just the idea of, a traditional scrapyard where the bloke would literally take anything off you. I'll also do a little bit of weathering to those pipes. Nice that they are. It's a nice finish. It's a little bit too light to my liking, so I will do a few effects and bits and pieces to that. And I think we do certainly need a couple of figures climbing over the cars, toolboxes, trying to get bits and pieces. Okay, back again. This time we've got some rusted corrugated sheeting. We've got some window frames. I've deliberately painted them a sort of weathered brown to sort of show that they might be wooden window frames, as this is the 1980s, and although PVC windows were widespread at this point, there were an awful lot of houses that still had the old wooden window frames. We've also got a couple of shopping trolleys. I thought just, stick them randomly in the scrapyard, something a little bit interesting. You get 10 in a pack, and although they're HO scale, they seem to work fine with the 00 scale stuff. They don't look like they're too small. I've got a few packs of these for other projects I have planned on the layout, so I've done 6 of them just to stick in the scrapyard. And I have also rusted them up a little bit, although you're used to seeing shopping trolleys in a very silver, clean condition. I have certainly seen a couple in people's gardens that have rusted quite heavily, so I decided to do that. And certainly if you see a shopping trolley that's been pulled out of a canal, it's not exactly silver anymore if it's been in there for a few years. So we've got quite a few bits and pieces in there now. I've added the scrap corrugated iron, and if you know where to look you can also spot the odd shopping trolley. And I have put one there, just randomly. Somebody could have been using it to put some car parts in while they were taking bits off one of the vehicles. There's some shopping trolleys over the back in that far corner. I've also added these scrap window frames, but they also could just be random pieces of metal as well. It doesn't have to be window frames. They just look like, a bit of scrap. It doesn't really matter. You can use any old bits and bobs that you've got lying around on your workbench. So I'm going to go away and make some more bits and pieces. And do remember that this rather clean side of the scrapyard is going to be reserved for white goods and appliances, but I haven't got round to sorting that out yet. That will be something I add in the future. However, there is so many bits and pieces here now, it is all in danger of getting knocked over when I come to place the next bits and pieces. So what I am going to do is soak the area down with isopropyl alcohol from a spray bottle and apply a mix of 50-50 mix of PVA glue and water just to set the scatter in position, and that will incidentally set the small bits of detail that I've placed on the ground in position as well. So it will glue the majority of the scrapyard in place and stop me from knocking things over. The cars themselves will remain relatively loose and I'll be able to pick those up and move those around. I could swap that Cortina for that Capri, for example, but I want to get all the bits and pieces glued down because it is getting rather easy to knock things over. Okay, I'll leave that to dry. I'll just do a quick check of the detail and make sure nothing has fallen over or gone into a place I don't want it to be. But everything for the moment does look good, so I'll leave it to dry. We'll come back and continue to add the effects, and it will just be a little bit easier knowing that most of this will be fixed in place, with the exception of the cars. Okay, so a little bit of airbrushing just to help bring this area together, and that's a logical place to finish for this video. This is by no means finished, there's an awful lot left to do, but certainly come a long way since that bare bit of concrete at the beginning. I've finished the airbrushing, and then what I've done after that is just apply a few highlights and a few oil spills. And you can see there's a few black splodges here and there from spilt fluids and things like that. And I've just applied a little bit more of the scatter material over the top of that just to break up the colour a little bit and add a few highlights. But for the most part, we're going for a dirty, muddy sort of ground, as this is what you often find in a scrapyard. Contaminated soil filled with grease and oil, water, mud, grease. It's not exactly a nice place to be. So it's important that the ground is a very sort of dark, almost like a grey colour, which is what we've achieved here. So I'll monitor this and see how it looks once it's dried, and if needs be I'll add a few more bits to it, but for the most part I'm quite happy with that for the moment. So there you go, I hope you enjoyed the video, perhaps picked up the odd hint or tip. And as always, I will be back as soon as I can when I've made enough progress on the next project.